Good evening, everyone. We continue on our study in the book of First Samuel. We're still in chapter 1. And the reason why we are plodding through a little slower than usual is because chapter 1 sets the stage for the rest of the chapters. And in this book, or a prophet book like First Samuel, it is what we call a narrative style writing. It is not the Lord said this, and the prophet would quote and will talk and complain about the people. Here in First Samuel, it is actually laying out a story. It is not just any story, it is part and parcel of the history of the nation. However, in that development of the story, as you know, and if any one of you are writers, you have to choose what you want to leave in the story, what you will leave out of the story, because it follows the theme and the importance of your message. And so we have covered yesterday up to verse 16 as to some of the important elements. In every verse, we find that. And more importantly, to understand the condition of the life of Hannah with regards to her situation of not able to bear a child, and she is under tremendous stress, both culturally as well as in the family front, where Panina, the other wife, had many sons and daughters, and she didn't, and she was vilified. And so in verse 16, we saw how she appealed to Eli not to cast her back to her rival, because what she has prayed for is to pour out her grievous heart. She is very, very broken as a woman. Verse 17 begins. Then Eli answered and said, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you have asked of him." Now, this is not exactly what the Hebrew says. So, unfortunately, we've been reading a lot in the English. And so, this seems to be like Eli was just giving her a well wish. Well, I hope things will be fine with you. Go your way. God bless you. Take care of you. That's not quite what verse 17 is saying. In this aspect, uh, the Eli actually answered and responded. And at this point in time, I also want to clarify that Eli is also a judge. We are in the period of the judges, and God has installed a number of them, and Eli took over from Samson. And so he says, "Walk in peace." Go means walk. This is a lot of words that is walking, and in the Hebrew sense, very oriental. She is to walk away. No, she's not taking a car. There's no limo. There's no horses to take her away. So it is very literal. Go in peace, or go walk to shalom. That is what the words actually refer to. And when it says go in peace, it means go towards completion. Uh, and it says, may the God of Israel. So this word, may the God of Israel grant your petition, is problematic, because that is not exactly how it is expressed. And so what Eli actually says is, uh, the God of Israel, and this is what exactly the Hebrew says. Uh, okay, let me just walk backwards a little bit. All right. This 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 verse actually reads this way. Instead of, and may the God of Israel grant your petition. Now, the word petition is uh, your request. All right, let me just put it up here. Your request. Because she has pleaded and interceded to God and requested for something. And so this word grant and may the Lord of Israel, the God of Israel grant, is actually it actually says this: the God of Israel will give. Now it's slightly different from how it's expressed here. The word will give is corresponding to how Eli as judge, all right, Eli as judge with divine inspiration, and that's how they believe this, that he is assuring Hannah, not well wishing Hannah, but assuring. And so this is a certainty. This is a certainty that you have what you have requested of God, what you have, uh, what you have asked of God, what you have inquired of God, what, and this is about asking favor of God, right? Asking favor. Now, Eli doesn't know exactly the contents of what Hannah had said or muttered in her heart, where her lips were moving, and Eli thought she was drunk. And now that Eli knew that she was pouring out her grief, Eli replied to her to go in peace. There will be completion to this request that God, the God of Israel, will give your request that you have asked of him. So, verse 17 describes a sense of certainty. And now, in this conversation, you find what Hannah says. He says, let your maidservant find favor in your sight. Now, understand this. There are two views. So I need to say this, right? There are two views. Um, the one view is that Hannah, this is Hannah's reply, right? Hannah is talking about God here, is talking to God here. Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So one aspect is the God of Israel. All right. Now, find favor is chen, grace. That's her name. So let your maidservant, and you notice this expression, let your maidservant, was actually part and parcel of her her prayer, right? Her prayer to God. And how should this would be in verse 11, right? You can see in verse 11. And she speaks to God in that respect that no, she is the maidservant, and may your maidservant find grace in your sight. So one aspect, some believe that, well, Hannah is praying to God. But I guess in the course of this conversation, as Eli had answered, verse 18 also tells us that this is a particular structure, because there is a word that is not translated here. It is the word and then, right? And then. Now, this word is not in your English translation, but it is in the Hebrew Bible. If you, I can show you here. This word is right here. This is what they call a consecutive conjunction. And then Hannah said, "Let your maidservant find grace in your sight." Could also mean, more properly, I think, would be speaking to Eli, asking him to intercede on Hannah's behalf and ask of God, because he is now the judge of all Israel. Right? That is the possible, and I think the second option right here is most likely how it could be read. Right? Either way, it is to intercede for her to God. Uh, if she finds grace in your eyes. So understand that the Hebrew culture and all Oriental culture, by the way, is that grace is always seen in the eyes. And if there's grace in the eyes of the beholder, then something good can be done and extended. The final statement here is so, and then it says, and then after this, the woman went her way and she ate, and her face was no longer sad. Now, this verse here, her face is no longer sad, um, is an expression to actually infer. All right, this word sad is being inferred, but it is a correct inference that her face was no longer what? No longer the way she came to Shiloh at the tabernacle to pray. And that would be uh, above in verse uh, 12, right? And 13, right? In 12 and 13. 11, 12, and 13, when she came to the tabernacle to pray. So at that point in time, then we are talking about looking back, because now is no longer. At that point in time, in verse 10 onwards, her face was down. And now it's no longer. Why? Because she has gotten confirmation that God will give her what she asked for. And that would be the picture of verses 17 and 18. Now, since she was convinced that God was going to give her, because Eli told her that God will give her what she prayed for, then they arose early in the morning. Now, early in the morning literally means early in the morning. And the first thing they did was they worshiped, and it means prostrated. This is not the English word worship. There is no such word in the Hebrew. Basically, it's prostrating, lying down before the Lord, face down, knees down before the Lord, is to the face of God, right? To the face of God. And so understand that in the Hebrew language, everything that is being narrated is to conjure an imagery so that the listeners who's hearing First Samuel can actually imagine what's really happening. And so they would be Elkanah and Hannah bowing down in the early morning as a prayer and a recognition of God, and to acknowledge God in the morning. And that's a common practice. They do that 3 times a day. And then they return to their house in Ramah. Now, I need us to be very clear with this. Now, Ramah is where Elkanah is, and Ramah will also be an important feature as the chapters go on, because that is also where Samuel will be. That will be the base, because that is Samuel's hometown. So remember Ramah, right? Ramah. Following on, we read this. And then Elkanah had relations with Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Now, let me just briefly explain this to you. This word had relations would be the modern expression. This word is actually new. This is a euphemism. This is from the word know. And you could see this in the first instance in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. All right. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. And Adam knew his wife, and she gave birth, right? She conceived and she gave birth. And so this is what it means that Elkanah had relations with Hannah. In short, Elkanah had sex with Hannah, his wife. Now, one important note is that in this physical relationship was when they returned to their house, not on the way, because the Jewish culture is such that they only practice intimacy when they are safe at home. And so this is basically describing the practice. And then it says that, and God remembered her. What about remembering her? This is important because she prayed to God in verse 10. Remember? In verse 10, she was weeping, and then she prayed, and in verse 11, and this would be verse 11, to remember her. And what does remember her actually mean? To remember her means to give her ability to bear the seed of men. That is what remembered here actually means. So understand this, the narrative is moving from the prayer in verse 11, which is also a vow, a solemn promise. Remember what Hannah promised, right? That God, please remember me, and I will loan him to you for the rest of his life, and no razor shall leave it be upon his head. The whole Nazarite vow, the vow of separation, to be given to God for his service for a period of 50 years. And then in verse 20, this is how it happened. The verse reads this: it came about in due time. And what it actually means, when the, how should we say, when the time, when the full course came about. What about the full course? Well, this is actually a very graphic description of the full course of I would say pregnancy. And it says, after Hannah had conceived, and then she gave birth to a son. So this is actually how the Hebrew always express it. One is she conceived, and when did she conceive? Right here. After this, and then she gave birth to a son. And notice, this is the fulfillment. So God remembered her and gave birth to a son. And that was her prayer. And she named him Shemuel, because I have asked him of the Lord. Now, what does this mean? Now, understand that this is about naming, right? Names define character. Names define character. That's number one. Names also define a memorial. What about a memorial? About a uh, 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 about a particular event, right? And in this case, it is more a memorial than a character, because Samuel was a name given to the child because an event happened. So that whenever you call his name Shemuel or Samuel that we are reading in the English, they people would remember what that meant, and especially Hannah. And so she says, because I have asked or requested him of the Lord. Always go back to verse 11. How God remembered, gave her a son. And in this case, she prayed to God, she made a request, and Eli in verse 17 says, the Lord will give you what you have requested of God. So what does Shemuel means? Right? The word is Shemuel. Shemuel means God has heard. Uh, I think it is in some of your dictionaries. It says, "Oh, this is the name of God." It's not the name of God. It means God has heard. What has God heard? God has heard the petition that she made, that Hannah made to God. And so this would be the result and the response of God. And whenever Shemuel's name is mentioned, then she will always remember God has answered her prayer. God has remembered her. God has opened her womb. Notice when God opens her womb, it doesn't miraculously appear, right? So it is about Elkanah having relations with her, or knew Hannah, meaning had sex with her. And this time, the womb was open such that the womb will receive the conception right here, and then germinate to full term to give birth to a son. And she is very happy now. She is no longer considered a dead woman. She is considered a blessed woman. Grace in the eyes of God. Hannah means grace. God has given her favor and looked down upon her and opened her womb and remembered her. Now, that is how the ancient women will relate such an event. Verse 21. Now you notice Elkanah has what we call, is a very religious Israelite. And if you recall, he is from the tribe of Levi. And Elkanah, with all his house, is going up to make a slaughter. Now, this word offer and this word sacrifice, uh, they they are both the same word, right? This is the same word. And so in terms of words, you find that this would be a noun and this would be a verb. And it actually means to slaughter. And so Elkanah is going up to Shiloh. with all his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. Now, interestingly, is this the hills of Ephraim is lower than Shiloh. Shiloh is also on a high plain. And so the height is slightly lower, actually. It's slightly lower. And so in the in the expression, so he is going up to Shiloh, right? Going up. And that is what up here literally means. He is actually going up to offer to the Lord the slaughter. And the final one here is also the slaughter for his vow. This word vow means he had made a promise to God. He has made, this is his vow. This is not Hannah's vow. And so everyone who makes a vow and is going to complete the vow has to go and make a peace offering. And this would be what we call a shalem, to complete the vow, right? To complete the vow, and there you have shalom. And so he was going, and of course he would bring the whole family. But it says in verse 22, Hannah did not go up, for she said to her man, her husband, and basically, if you can see this, these are all in italics. It says, I will not go up, does not appear in the Hebrew. This is supplied by the English translator to help us read this properly in English. She said to the husband, that until the child is weaned, then I shall bring him, that he shall appear before the Lord and stay there forever. Now, let us break this down. It is a bit challenging to understand what exactly Hannah is doing. First of all, until the child is weaned. Until the child is weaned means stop drinking, well, I would say stop sucking milk, right? This is approximately 22 to 24 months. About 2 years. Which means that Hannah will not go up to Shiloh until the child is about 2 years old. And that's the period of weaning. And then I will bring him, right? And that he may go and this what may appear before it, and that to cause him to see, right? Cause him to see. This word before the Lord is not quite there. Cause him to see the face of the Lord. Right? Number one. This is number one. And stay there forever. Now, you need to understand there is no such word called forever. This is olam. The prayer or the vow, the promise that Hannah made in verse 11 says, and he'll be there for the rest of his life. Here, to stay there forever, or olam, for a long, long time. right? For a long, long time. Now, this is a very important aspect of what we call um, the service of the Levi, right? The service of the Levi. Now, the service of the Levi is, I guess, it's kind of different from how uh, how we would understand it. Now, I think in Numbers chapter 8, let me see, verse 25. Numbers chapter 8 and verse 25 reads this way. Numbers chapter 8, verse 25 says, and at the age of 50 years, they must cease performing this work and shall work no more. And at 50 years old, this is retirement. And so forever in this case is for another until he's 50 years old. Now, understand that he is only going when he is 2 years old. To the point of 50 years old, he would be serving for 48 years, right? 48 years. So now we can do a bit of math. And so he is to appear, cause him to see the face of God, and he will stay in the face of God for 48 years. That's forever, actually, for the entire lifetime uh, of, of Samuel, basically. Uh, and you need to understand this is a very important element in the story, in the narrative, that this was what Hannah made the promise to God, that if God were to remember her, give her a seed of men, and she will give her to God or lend her to God, so that he will be there for the rest of his life, and no razor shall be upon his head. And the intent is to set him apart to serve God. And Numbers chapter 8, verse 25 gives us the indication of the period of time. So until 50 years old. And so we're talking about a good 48 years, and that in the mind of the Israelite is forever. Is olam, basically. It's olam. Verse 23. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Now, this is interesting. The phrase in verse 23 is quite interesting. Do what is best, or what seems best, actually means make the good in your eyes. Now, this is the literal rendition of this phrase, what seems best to you. Make the good or make the best in your eyes, meaning do what you think is best. I think in our today language would be go do what you think is best. You see, the husband in those days, and you can see how Elkanah relates to Hannah, and being a pious man, a religious man, also understands that she has made a vow and she is to fulfill her vows. And whatever that vow may be, Elkanah says, do what you see. Now, understand, this is about the eyes. What you see is the good thing, the best thing. And so good and evil is really from the eyes of the beholder. And so Elkanah says, well, in your eyes, if you see it as good, then go do it. Then go do it. And remain here until you have weaned him. Now, the word wean, as you have seen, is that the child will come to a point where he doesn't suck milk anymore. Only may the Lord confirm his word. And I guess this is a bit problematic, right? A bit problematic. This one says, only may the Lord fulfill his word in verse 23, is that the Lord may confirm or establish. His word would be this incident. What incident is this? The incident that he has heard Hannah, remembered her, opened her womb, and she gave birth. She is now responding that once it's completed, then God will have established everything he said he will do. And so the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. The word nurse is suckle, like a nursing mother, allowing her to suck milk until the period of weaning, remember, 22 to 24 months. Verse 24. Now when she had weaned him after this period, she took him up with her. And what did she do? With a 3-year-old bull, interestingly, in verse 24, here it says a 3-year-old bull. Okay. The Hebrew actually expresses it as 3 bulls, right? Not 3-year-old bull, but 3 bulls. And this really is a heave offering, right? This is a peace offering because it is a completion of a vow. A heave offering using the flour. You need three parts of the flour for 1 bull. And so 1 ephah is 10 seahs. So you can get 3 portions for the heave offering for the 3 bulls. A jug of wine would be a drink offering. And these will be the offerings that she gives as a completion of her vow to God. Because God answered and she brought him to the house of the Lord. And this word is house, no longer a hekal, a palace, but it refers to the same thing, the house of the Lord. In Shiloh, although the child was young, the child was 2 years. 2 years. You find that this is actually the definition of the word na'ar. Na'ar is usually translated as youth, but in the Hebrew, it is a young boy, right? A 2-year-old boy, because she just weaned him, right? She just weaned him. And that would be this period here. Verse 25. Then they slaughtered the young bull, and in fact, this is not just bull, but young bull. right? Young bull. And they brought the boy to Eli. Now remember the role of Eli. Eli is a priest. Eli is also a judge. He sits on the seat of the judge at the gate of the tabernacle. And then verse 26, she says, "Oh my Lord." Remember, this is Adoni, not Adonai, right? Adoni as to a person. As your, this word is nefesh. As your nefesh, your being is alive. My Adoni, I, the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. Remember, this word praying is to intercede to the Lord. And then she explains now, for this boy I had prayed, and the Lord has given me my request that I have asked this favor of him. And so she comes and I guess this is a to testify, right? To testify that God has answered her prayers and she is here to fulfill her vow. And let me pause by explaining this concept. When a person makes a solemn vow to God, a formal solemn promise to God, doesn't matter whether you call it an oath or a swear or a vow or a promise. When you make it to God, or when you make it in the name of God, you are obligated to fulfill it. Otherwise, the Torah says that would be blasphemy to God, that you take God as nobody, that you couldn't be bothered with God, and what you promised you don't do. And the person will be cut off from the people. It is that serious. And so she is now coming around to fulfill her vow, to shalem, to make complete the vow, so that she can have shalom, she can have peace, because everything would have been settled with God. Verse 28 is the last verse for chapter 1. And it says this, and so I have dedicated him to the Lord as long as he lives. Remember, this is verse 11. The prayer is, as long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. Now, we need to be clear exactly what is being said. Now, I know the English seems to be, well, it appears quite straightforward. And so understand this. This word here, so I have, in verse 28, and so even I have caused, right? Cause, it's the same word as asking a request from God. But in this case, this word is what we call in the hifil. It is to cause herself to give or to lend to God. Now, that would be the so this word dedicated is just too broad. It is to cause herself to give Samuel or to lend Samuel to God. What do you mean to lend Samuel to God? Now understand, There are two things that's happening here. She prayed the prayer. She said exactly that if God listens to her and remembers her, or meaning to open her womb and to give her a son, not a daughter, but a son. And in that case, she would give him to God and would not allow the razor to be upon his head. That was the Nazarite vow, is to set him apart for God for as long as he lives, right? As long as he is alive, right? He is, and this word here, he is borrowed, right? He is borrowed. He is borrowed or lent to the Lord. So this word dedicate is really not a good word to express. So I'll just put a cross here. It's not a wrong word. I think it's not expressing it as correctly as what Hannah has promised in verse 11. For as long as he is alive, then he is loaned or lent or allow God to borrow. Why? Because he is a firstborn. He is a firstborn. All right. And as firstborn, God has allowed firstborns to be redeemed by the family. But in this case, she is now allowing her firstborn to be separated for God for as long as he is alive, for as long as he lives. God can use him. That was her vow, her promise to God. And with this, he prostrated, right? This is what he prostrated there. And there he prostrated, not worship. He prostrated himself there to God. And basically, what does this mean? He is now presented as offering. Now, we may not appreciate what the ancients are doing. So I just want to conclude chapter 1 by just saying this. Much of what we think in the 21st century by reading the English words seem not to be able to express the weight and the severity of Hannah's prayer and vow to God. And why is she doing all these rituals is because it is part of the Torah. And she is there to also fulfill her vow, which is the peace offering, the shalem, so that she will have shalom. She has 2 years with her child. She is no longer a dead woman. She is now remembered by God. She has grace from God's eyes. And she is now giving him back to God or loaning him to God because she, by right, has him as her child, as her firstborn as well. And she is now loaning him to God, but not for a short period, for as long as he lives, until he finishes the separation, which is 50 years. Numbers chapter 8, verse 25. And this is the seriousness of Hannah with what she said to God. These practices are, I would think, not very much appreciated today. And we don't understand the severity, we don't appreciate the magnitude of her gratefulness to God, that she is now removed from one who is declared a dead woman to one who is very much alive to give birth to a son as a firstborn, and also to be able to assign and loan him to God, which is her honor, in memory of God hearing her prayers. And that is the conclusion of First Samuel chapter 1 today.